بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. نويت تعلم وتعليم تذكر والتذكير ونفع فرع الاستفادة، وحتى أتمس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير ابتغاء والسلام وطاعة كل ثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا، إنك على إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So, أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا, and welcome to our monthly session of Living Islam for the month of May. For those of you who this may be their first time joining us, our Living Islam is something that was developed a few years ago, to give people a space that they can feel that they can dictate the conversation, meaning that um, with the Mecca Center specifically, we would have courses and classes and sometimes presentations that were always focused around particular topics, particular subject matter. And so some of the participants would sometimes say that they wanted to have a space where it wasn't necessarily topic specific, such that if they had a question or if they were going through a particular situation, or if they wanted to discuss something, that they can have a space where they can feel free, to talk about anything, essentially. And so we developed the Living Islam from that perspective. And so I always like to begin with my little spiel that, for example, I don't have anything prepared. Like, I don't have a topic that I plan on going over. I don't have any presentation materials to show. So I am just here to be in all of your company. And so essentially, this is going to be what we make of it. So if we want to sit in each other's um, silence for the next 2 hours, then alhamdulillah. But with that, that's just kind of like an introduction to the Living Islam. And so I kind of turn the floor over to whoever wants to, break the ice, so to speak. I also like to include that this is not, I don't like to make this seem as if it's a Q&A session. This is again, it's an open forum, so it's not a situation where just people have to ask me questions and you get my faulty response. But this is again, an open discussion, open forum. So please feel free. So for example, if you're joining us via Zoom, then you can unmute yourselves. You don't necessarily have to type in the chat. You don't have to wait for me to call on you or anything of that nature. This is, previously, prior to COVID, we actually used to do the Living Islam in person. So that actually added to the more informal, intimate feel. But you know, we make do with what we have within that. So I turn it over to all of you. Um,
I have a question, Imam.
ها تفضل.
Uh, I'm really struggling with fatigue and sleep deprivation. I am a new Muslim, and this is the first time I'm getting up maybe at 4 a.m. to pray Fajr and stay up until 10:30 to pray Isha, and still meet all of my work obligations, family obligations, maybe even physical fitness, things like that. Do you have any tips on how to manage um, I guess fatigue or sleep deprivation during the long summer days? Thank you.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll put it to you that way. Um, and I also, it becomes a physical difficulty for me myself. Especially like even with the month of Ramadan, I remember a few years back when Ramadan was closer to the summer time, I was at my brother-in-law's house and we were talking about Ramadan, and all of us, like me, my wife, my brother-in-law, his wife, we all kind of came to the same conclusion that, it wasn't the aspect of not being able to eat that was the difficulty, but it was the aspect of not being able to get as much sleep. That was the difficulty. And, it was more of an issue of fatigue than it was an issue of hunger or thirst. But in general, there are a few recommendations. So one is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he actually disliked for people to engage in anything that was not necessary after the time of Isha. So after the Isha's prayer, the sunnah, the recommendation is that a person goes to sleep immediately after that. So for example, right now, the Isha prayer, depending on where you're at, is roughly going to be coming in around 10 o'clock or so. And so ideally, if a person is going to be praying in the congregation, for example, then they can pray in the congregation for Isha, do the sunnahs after Isha, which would be the two sunnahs after Isha plus the witr prayer. And then immediately after that, as soon as they go home, get right into the bed, go straight to sleep. And as you mentioned, is that and we're going to talk about the aspect of Fajr as well. But by the time that you get to Isha, if you're making sure to pray all of your prayers correctly and you're going about your regular day, you should be tired anyway. So it shouldn't be that much of a difficulty to go to sleep. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where you're struggling to go to sleep, another thing to take in consideration, and this is something that one of our teachers he had mentioned that he tries to do himself as well, is that also reduce your screen time. In particular, reduce your screen time after dark. So, basically, if you can put away any type of device by 8 o'clock, do that, because the blue light that comes from the screens, they actually stimulate the brain, which keeps a person up. And so I would say any type of screen, whether it's television, phone, tablet, laptop, everything that has internet capability, turn it off. As much as possible, turn it off. Uh, don't have it on past 8 o'clock if you're capable. And definitely don't necessarily go to sleep with it. And this is me preaching to the choir because I don't necessarily always follow my own advice. But that is something to also keep in mind. Thirdly, um, take care of your body. So that means eating well and exercising. And so eating well, meaning don't eat junk food as much as possible, and try to reduce the sugars, uh, and the over processed foods, because your body, it the funny thing is that again, this like everything that I'm saying is things that I need to start doing again or implementing, and I haven't necessarily been the best implementing it lately. But for example, this book here, Food Between Curse and Cure, that you can't really even see because of my background. But in any case, there you go. Food Between Curse and Cure. So, for example, this book, what it goes over is the aspect of how to utilize food as more or less medicinal purpose, because the aspect of food is that food is actually supposed to be a means of us gaining the necessary nutrition that we need for our bodies, to be able to go about our lives in a healthy way. But unfortunately, for many of us, I'm not necessarily saying it's for you specifically, but for many of us, we don't eat in a manner where we use our food as a true cure. We use it more from the standpoint of a curse, in the sense that, we eat these things that actually have detrimental effects on our body. So, for example, if you can reduce the sugar, and that also includes the simple carbohydrates. So like, the refined the refined flour and stuff like that. If you can try to reduce or even possibly, get rid of them completely from your diet, then that would actually help the body. Um, and then the second aspect of that is exercise, is that, having the body be active, so that it has greater energy that it can utilize. And this could just be, for example, just 45 minutes of intense workout. One of the things that one of my teachers, he even recommended, is that if you have kettlebells, that if you learn how to do the swing with the kettlebells, and you do that intensely for like 10 minutes or 12 minutes, even that will have great physical um, benefits for the body. Now, in terms of, the sleep as well, is that when you're getting up for Fajr, is that trying to see if you can have a qaylula at some point in time. A qaylula is a nap. So sometime during the day, and this could either be after Fajr itself. So for example, Fajr comes in, like you said, around 4 o'clock in the morning or so. And so oftentimes people, we don't necessarily have to be ready for work that early. So if I can pray Fajr around 4 o'clock, and then I can sleep for another hour and a half or so, then that is, something that can also assist me in getting the necessary sleep that I would need. Or if that's not necessarily a possibility, even for example, if I'm able to just to take a nap sometime during the day. So for example, on my lunch break at work, if I can take an hour nap or something like that, or even when I come home from work, if I can take an hour nap or something like that. But one of the things, and this is something that I received from my doctor as well, is that you don't want it to be like an extremely long nap, meaning that you don't want it really to go past an hour. That basically what they call is a power nap. Is that you sleep for that hour or so, and that also is beneficial for the body. So these are, and then going back to, what I had mentioned previously about going to sleep right after Isha, is that doing your best not to be what people call a night owl. So basically throughout the year, you never want to be in a situation where you're up past 11 o'clock. So you should, just like, I know when I was a kid, I had a bedtime, so as an adult, kind of try to do the same thing for yourself, is that you have a bedtime, meaning that no matter what the situation is, I do not stay up past 11 o'clock. My doctor, his recommendation was that by every night I should be trying to be in the bed by at least 10:30. That 10:30, I'm in the bed. And so, because essentially your REM sleep, your deepest sleep, that's the most beneficial and most rejuvenating, generally speaking, are going to be between the hours of about 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. So between that time, you want to be asleep. And if you're not, it's going to throw your body off. So does that help a little bit? I mean, I know you can't necessarily tell if it's going to work unless until you actually try, but were those some things that you
Yes, absolutely. This is very helpful. Thank you, Imam.
no problem.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam Tariq.
Um, am I allowed to add on to what you just said?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. I I'm I'm an all night owl, but I think I find because I'm a new Muslim that the excitement over learning and the hunger that you have wanting to consume as much as you can to get close to Allah, uh, it keeps that adrenaline really really high, and it's hard to go to sleep when I'm up studying all night. So I found that eventually I had to have a time set aside when I study. So I think um, to add on, the most important, one of the important things is what do you call it? Not just consistency, but having a schedule, like you were saying, finding yourself a schedule where you would be able to stick to, where you have your time for study and your time for sleep, your time to and eating, definitely eating healthy helps you to sleep, sleep better. Okay, so I wanted to just say the excitement sometimes is so hard with wanting to learn so much is something that I just pray about. But my question is, when I became a new Muslim, I was bombarded with um all these I know you have to cover completely my face. I wear the niqab and all the covering. You cannot take pictures, no pictures, get off of social media. So I did all of that. You spend a moment in what do you call it, in hell. If you have pictures, you're not allowed to have, even if you already had it before you became Muslim, you're not allowed to use credit cards and have debt, and not debt, but the interest. The interest is the sin, that you can go to hell for having interest. I didn't understand that, because I thought the people that add the interest are the ones that should get in trouble. But anyway, so interest, and then you're not allowed to listen to music. You're not allowed to like all these different things. So I'm right now. I've read the Quran for Ramadan. I read the Quran every night, but I wanted to finish the whole thing before Ramadan was over. I had made that commitment, and I didn't see those things in there. So I know there's hadiths that I'm still getting through different things. I don't want to do everything at one time. I want to finish a book at a time, understand it, even if I have to read it 3 or 4 times. And I do have people that I have some questions that that have been Muslims for a long time and studied and Saudi that I can ask some questions too with. But so my questions are, these are coming from the hadiths, and um yeah, about all those different things that that you can go to hell for.
Okay. So it seems like you've like jumped right into like the contentious topics of things that you know Muslims will discuss probably until the coming of the Mahdi, the coming of the Prophet Isa alayhi salam and the Mahdi at the end of times. Meaning that like some of the things that you were discussing in regards to, for example, music or pictures or wearing the niqab, these are things that the scholars of Islam do not have what we call in Arabic ijma' in regards to, in terms of there's not a scholarly consensus um, of all of these matters. And so this is why, like, if you go online and you do a Google search for any of these topics within Islam, you'll probably see about every position under the sun that there possibly could be in regards to these questions. So the thing is that in the beginning, in particular, it's really, as you kind of mentioned in the questioning itself, is that it's best to just do things bit by bit. And so usually what I advise people when they are first learning about Islam is, in the beginning, make the prayer your primary focus. That, learning the details about the prayer. And for example, if you look at any book of Islamic law, any book of fiqh that a person might study, it always begins with purification and prayer. So for example, like many of the topics that you're discussing in terms of like interest or music or pictures and things like that, these topics don't even show up until you get to the end of the book, towards the end. A lot of them are going to be under the chapters that are referred to as mu'amalat. These are uh, social dealings, so to speak. Uh, but the aspect of ibadat, that's always first. And so I would say probably the best thing, because the thing is that any one of those questions, I, probably the next 2 hours discussing them. But yes, some of the rulings that scholars have determined from them are coming from hadith of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of them are coming from the Quran. So, for example, the aspect of interest, it is mentioned in the Quran, and in the Quran, the in the second chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, towards the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he talks about riba, which essentially is going to be what we refer to as interest. And he mentions is that he says that the war of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon those who engage in riba. Now, the thing is, though, is that we have the text of the Quran that mentions this. However, how we practically apply that in our lives today, where basically all financial structures have interest involved in it, that is something that the scholars they discuss in terms of how we practically apply this. So for example, living in America, medical insurance more or less deals in interest. And so if we were to try to apply this ruling of, interest being absolutely haram, then we have another issue in regards to the practicality of Muslims being able to seek medical assistance, because for example, if you go and you try to pay out of pocket just for a medical test, that can be, $18,000-$20,000, for example. So scholars have mentioned that because America, as an example, does not have a universal healthcare system, that it's permissible for Muslims to utilize health insurance because of the necessity of the preservation of life, meaning that there are certain things where even if they would normally be impermissible, become permissible because of a greater good that they're accomplishing. So as an analogy, it's kind of like the question that people ask. It's like, if you were on a desert island and there's nothing for you to eat except for a pig, would you eat it? The short answer to the question is that it would be permissible for a Muslim if he absolutely cannot eat anything else except for a pig. It becomes permissible for him to eat the necessary amount of that pig to keep himself alive because of the aspect of the preservation of life. And so what is normally impermissible, because, if people don't know anything about Islam, they know that Muslims can't eat pork. But in the case where there's a necessity, meaning a necessity of preserving life, then that supersedes even the ruling of it being impermissible in general to eat pork. But again, these are concepts that are necessary to be explained by teachers and scholars, and for specific situations to be addressed. And so this is why essentially what I tell people is that in the beginning, in particular, focus on the prayer, because even our scholars of Islamic law, of fiqh, that is how they prioritize things. The first chapter that you'll, like I said, the first chapter that you'll see in pretty much any fiqh book is going to be purification and prayer. And so one of the things that person could do is that they could go about studying a book of fiqh, a book of Islamic law with a teacher. And then by doing that, inshallah, it will start to answer some of our questions in a general sense in terms of us seeing, how we are supposed to take and understand our deen. So does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Alhamdulillah. There was another question. I just want to, because there's some questions that are being placed in the chat, so I want to make sure I don't miss it. Reaching out, as it would be great to have this discussion about the science of seerah in relation to how the Prophet ﷺ chose his wives, why he chose them, and his relationships with each of them, as well as his children with them. Through studying Islam, I learned that Salama radiallahu anha and her first husband radiallahu anhu migrated, and after her husband passed away and she became a widow, the Prophet ﷺ married her. Were his primary motivations taqwa and rauf? Allahu alam. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he did marry Salama, However, what many of the ulama they mention about the marriages of the Prophet Muhammad SAW is that all of them had a particular wisdom in them, oftentimes in the aspect of bringing together the different aspects of the Muslim community and as a means of showing the kind of the some of the permissibilities of marriage and the permissibilities of marrying between tribes and so on and so forth. But Allahu Alam, I'm not going to begin to say that I have an extensive knowledge on the seerah. Um, But Allahu Alam, ultimately, what the Prophet's ultimate intent behind marrying Salama was. But yes, he did marry Salama after her husband passed away. But like I said, the ulama they mention that the Prophet he married his wives for a greater good that went beyond the aspect of how we usually go about finding a spouse in terms of, we just find someone that we are attracted to. But as the Prophet ﷺ gave us advice, he mentioned that we should always marry a person of taqwa, marrying a person for their deen. And so, of course, we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he's the greatest example for us. And so all of the Ummahatul Mu'mineen, all the mothers of the believers, were righteous women. And the Prophet ﷺ, he married them for reasons that were um, of a greater benefit with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah knows best. I'm sure you can see me on the camera looking around. I'm actually trying to see if I can find my book of Sirah. Give me 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know off the top of my head the specific reason that the Prophet ﷺ chose to marry Salama specifically. But as I mentioned, that in general, we say that the Prophet ﷺ, he always did it. Any of the marriages that the Prophet ﷺ engaged in was from the standpoint of um, a wisdom beyond the normative reasonings that we typically get married, and Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum. Are there narrations that provide guidance slash hidayat as to how the Prophet ﷺ was prepared for and practiced qiyam and tahajjud? So basically, some of the things that we mentioned in regards to the sleep is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he used to prepare um, his things for getting up in the night prior to him going to sleep. So, for example, this is before the time of, you know, formal bathrooms and things of that nature. So the Prophet ﷺ would have his water and things of that nature prepared for him before he went to sleep at night. And he would sleep on a palm fiber mattress that was not necessarily all that comfortable. So this is another thing that in our times we, we spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, trying to get the best mattress and the most comfortable and, the deep sleep and so on and so forth. Whereas the actual sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, if you look at his life, was that he actually there was a situation in which one of his wives had actually tried to make his bed more comfortable for him. She had changed the mattress, she basically had doubled it to try to make it more comfortable for him. And it caused for the Prophet ﷺ to sleep longer than he normally would. And when he woke up, he had asked her, did you do something to my mattress? And she said that, yes, I tried to, I doubled it to try to make it more comfortable. And he said, put it back to its previous state, because he did not want to be in a situation where he would be in a situation where he was more likely to sleep more, such that he would miss or possibly miss the standing in the night for the tahajjud and the qiyam. So the Prophet ﷺ, he also teaches us about that, is that we shouldn't look for over over we shouldn't look for luxuriousness in terms of our sleep, that if we have things that we can keep simple, even from the standpoint of the type of bedding that we sleep upon, such that it actually creates a situation where it's easier to get up in the middle of the night. And then also the Prophet ﷺ, one of his sunnahs was that when he would wake up in the middle of the night, is that he would get straight up. As for many of us, at least the fakir here, sometimes, we have an alarm or something like that that we might set, and we, hit the snooze or we turn it off, whatever case may be, we roll back over and we, always lie to ourselves like, yeah, just 5 more minutes and, so on and so forth. And that 5 minutes turns into 2 hours or whatever the case may be. But the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that when he would wake up in the middle of the night, that he would get himself straight up. And this is another way of combating the shaitan, who is going to try to keep you from being able to get up at night. And then the Prophet ﷺ would go and he would relieve himself and make the proper purification, the istinja. He would make his wudu, and then he recommended that you begin the night prayer by praying 2 brief rakahs. You pray 2 light rakahs, 2 brief rakahs, kind of to get yourself um, into the spirit of the tahajjud. And then after that, you can pray as long as you wish, ideally in sets of 2, so praying 2 rakahs. And then if you have not already done so, ending it all with the witr prayer, that you end it all with the witr prayer before Fajr comes in. And if you're able to, and you don't fear missing the Fajr prayer, to actually go to sleep after that as well, to have a brief nap after getting up to pray tahajjud before getting up to pray Fajr. However, if you fear that you will possibly sleep past the Fajr prayer, then it's best to not try to do that, or you can just mimic the aspect of sleeping, so that you don't necessarily lie down to sleep, but maybe you just put your head into your hand and mimic the aspect of sleeping. But of course, we don't want for you to miss the obligatory prayer, which would be the Fajr prayer, and Allah knows best. When Islam was being spread to different parts of the world, how was the community able to grow as far as people trained as muezzins? Um, there's actually just like many of the subjects that we have uh within the sciences of Islam, um, that many of the subjects we have was called the ijaza system or isnad, a chain of transmission. So likewise, even with the calling of the adhan, the calling, because the muadhin is the person who calls the adhan, is that there is an isnad for a person who wants to learn how to truly call the adhan. And so that is the more formal, official way of being truly trained to be able to call the adhan truly properly. But in general, a person can learn how to call the adhan in a basic fashion by anyone that knows the basic pronunciations of the adhan, and Allah knows best. Please explain if one has to make up the 5 obligatory prayers that they have missed during the past, before and after reverting. Can one do one time each qada prayer moving forward daily? Any specific rules from the Shafi school? Um, I'm almost a little afraid to answer, in the sense that I don't want people to feel overwhelmed. So for one, is that it's more or less considered to be ijma. There's agreement upon with the scholars of Islam that a person who was not a Muslim, meaning that this person was not born to Muslim parents, that they had not accepted Islam at any point in their life, so they grew up without being within the fold of Islam, that if that person does become Muslim, there is no obligation for them to re-pray the prayers that they would have missed during the time that they were not Muslim. So that's agreed upon. Now, when it comes to a person who is Muslim, whether they were born to Muslim parents and they reached puberty and they have maintained their Islam, or if they were a person who reverted to Islam, and at some point in time after they've reached puberty, if they were born to Muslim parents, or after they converted or reverted to Islam, that there is some period of time that they missed the prayer or they did not pray without excuse. In that particular situation, the scholars more or less say that that person would need to make up those prayers that they missed. And particularly because the questioner is asking from the standpoint of the Shafi school would say that the person should only focus on making up those missed prayers and those things that are absolutely necessary for them to do. So basically what we're saying is that in the Shafi school is that if a person has unexcused missed prayers, that the only thing that they should be doing is making up those prayers and those things that are absolutely necessary for them to do. So, for example, eating, sleeping, going to work, if they're the sole provider of their household, basically you wouldn't be doing any type of extracurricular activities other than making up the prayer. And the basis of it being is that the prayer is extremely important. It's the first thing that a person is going to be asked about. And we don't know when we're going to leave this world. And so we want to be in a situation where we don't have the debt of missed prayers owed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the more strict position in the Shafi school. However, many Shafi'i ulama, what they mention, more contemporary Shafi'i ulama, what they mention is that this, for many people, is something that, can sometimes even cause for people to try to just give up altogether. Like, if they know that they have 5 years or 10 years worth of prayers they have to make up, and the only thing that they are allowed to do is just make up those prayers and so on and so forth, like that could be a little bit overwhelming for people. And so it can sometimes cause people to just give up altogether, like, well, I just can't do it. And, they'll, become disheartened and so on. So what many of my teachers have mentioned in regards to qada prayers, in terms of make up prayers, is that they say to set a reasonable and healthy amount of qada, of makeup prayers that you can do, and just do that consistently. there are some suggested numbers that are thrown out there. So for example, like five, making up 5 days in a day or 3 days in a day, so on and so forth. But essentially, the most important thing is consistency. That you don't want to be a situation where you all of a sudden, you try to make up 10 days in one day, and then, you can only do this for 2 days, and then you just completely leave it off altogether. So, something that you can do that's consistent. And usually one of the easier times to try to do this is during the tahajjud time, so that instead of praying tahajjud, that you would um, pray your qada prayers during that time. And then also, instead of praying the sunnah prayers, like the sunnah prayers associated with the obligatory prayers, that you can also pray your qada prayers then. So for example, instead of praying the 4 sunnah prayers before dhuhr, then rather just praying make up dhuhr prayer. And instead of praying 2 or 4 sunnah prayers after dhuhr, then you can pray another dhuhr prayer. And instead of praying the 4 sunnah prayers before Asr, you pray just a qada of Asr, and so on and so forth. And so doing this and just trying to be consistent with it. And then you'll see that even if it's a little, over time it will add up, inshallah. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us to fulfill our obligations. I sometimes see clean-shaven brothers at the local masjid. Is the beard sunnah or farad, or is this another matter of dispute among scholars? So the beard is considered to be something that is differed upon. However, the keeping of the beard in general is something that is agreed upon, that a man should keep a beard if he's able to grow one. However, the manner in which a man has to keep that beard differs. And so the Shafi'i school is the most lenient in regards to the keeping of the beard, where they say that for a man to not keep a beard is makruh, is disliked. So it's not going to be necessarily deemed to be haram, but it's going to be disliked. It's going to be makruh. However, if a man does not keep a beard because he's trying to imitate another people, or because he feels that not having a beard is superior or is better, then that actually would be considered to be haram. That would be considered to be sinful according to the Shafi school. In the Maliki school, they consider that a man needs to keep a beard, meaning to shave the beard would be sinful. However, what they deem to be the beard is essentially whatever is recognized as being a beard according to one's common cultural customs. So, for example, it wouldn't be a situation where you just have to completely leave the beard um, uh, altogether, meaning like you could not shave or trim the beard at all. But they would say that, whatever would be commonly recognized as being a beard, that's what a man would keep. So, for example, you could, possibly shape up the beard, or trim the beard slightly, and so on and so forth. In the Maliki school, that would be considered to be permissible as long as the facial hair is recognized as being as being having a beard for a man. The Hanafi school and the Hanbali school, they are some of the more reserved schools in regards to the keeping of the beard. Is that in the Hanafi school and the Hanbali school, they more or less say that a man should not basically take a razor or any type of cutting device to the beard. And so will be considered to be the beard is the hair that grows along the jawbone, that essentially that there should not be any razor or any trimmers or anything like that that goes along that area, as well as in the, if I'm not mistaken, in the Hanbali school as well as the Hanafi school, the hair that actually grows underneath is also considered to be a part of the beard, except for that which grows like on the Adam's apple and the neck. that can be trimmed or shaven off completely. And so essentially, what you can say is that that's in some manner, a man should have a beard. Ideally, you would keep the beard. Basically, you would let the beard grow because we do have hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he advised us to let the beard grow. And so when we say let the beard grow, it doesn't mean like you just let the beard grow and you don't do anything with it, but meaning you let the beard grow, meaning that you don't shave the hair. But the sunnah is that you take care of the beard so that you would comb it, you would brush it, you would oil it, you would make it look presentable, you would make it look neat, even to the point that some scholars mention, like, for example, if a man has a really long beard, that they can cup the beard at the chin, and whatever grows beyond the hands, that they can trim, that hair off, such that the beard is not growing excessively long. But essentially having the facial hair for the man who's able to grow it. But at the same time, because there is no consensus in regards to how much and what is necessarily going to be considered to be the beard, because, for example, in the Shafi school, there is a position that will say that the beard is only that which grows along the chin. So that, whatever grows on the chin, that will be considered to be the beard. This is why, for example, sometimes you may see some of the Yemeni ulama, some of the Shafi Yemeni ulama, that they only have the hair on the chin, and they don't have the hair that grows along the rest of the jawline. Because there is a position in the Shafi school that says that the beard is actually the hair that grows along the chin itself. So essentially, when it comes to other people, we have husnul dhan billah, we have a good opinion, and we don't, pass judgment on other people in regards to how they may or may not keep their beard. But for our own personal practices, then it's best if a man were to keep his beard, but then if you're going to keep the beard, that you keep it looking neat and well presentable. Does that help to uh, does that help to clarify about the beard?
Yes, it does. Thanks again, Imam.
No problem.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
I just wanted to go back to the making up the prayers. So, if you have Maghrib and Fajr prayers to make up, how do you do that? Do you still do the sunnahs and then add do the two rakats for the no? Do you do the sunnah and then like for Fajr and then do two more for Fard if you two more rakats if you miss Fajr?
So my question, I'm going to have a follow-up question for you to try to better answer the question.
Yes.
Are you coming from any particular school of law?
No.
No? Okay. So in that particular case, because there may be people who are from multiple schools of law, I'll give you two of the schools of law. I'll give you the Hanafi school and the Shafi school. So
Okay.
in the Hanafi school of law, what a person would do is that the Sunnah Mu'akkadas, or sometimes they refer to it the Rawatib, which essentially in the Hanafi school are going to be the two Sunnahs. Sorry. There's two Sunnahs before Fajr.
Yes.
Um, Four Sunnahs before Dhuhr. Two Sunnahs after Dhuhr.
Okay.
Two Sunnahs after Maghrib. Two Sunnahs after Isha.
Isha.
And then you have Witr. So these are going to be, in particular, this is going to be in the Hanafi school of law. These are going to be considered to be the rawatib, the sunnah mu'akkadas is how it's sometimes also mentioned. Um, and then witr in the Hanafi method is actually going to be considered to be a wajib, basically almost obligatory. And so in the Hanafi school, a person would not miss any of these sunnahs.
Okay.
That these sunnahs in particular, a person would, make sure that they're praying. The only exception is going to be that along with this is that you will do your qada prayers along with this. But at the same time, in the Hanafi school, you would also have to keep in mind the times where the prayer is impermissible. So, for example, when the sun is rising, that is a time that is permissible to pray. So, in the Hanafi school, you would not, even if you have qada, you would not necessarily pray at that time.
Right.
So that's going to be the Hanafi position. And even in the Hanafi school, I have to go back and double check. There are some exceptions even to the normatively impermissible times when it comes to the qada prayers. But if you wanted to know specifically from the Hanafi school perspective, the book Ascent to Felicity, which is a Hanafi fiqh book, that if I'm not mistaken, they give some clarification as to some of the exceptions to that. In the Shafi school, you would actually not pray any sunnahs, period. Not even the rawatib. The only thing that you'll be doing is that you'll be doing qada prayers. You'll be doing makeup prayers. The basis from the Shafi school being is that how could one pray a supererogatory prayer, meaning a prayer that's not obligatory, when they still have obligatory prayers that they have to fulfill? So in the Shafi school, it would be a situation where you would only be permitted to pray your qada prayers until they've all been made up. However, many Shafi ulama, pretty much all of my Shafi fiqh teachers, they would say that even though that is the position in the Shafi school, that is the mu'tamid, that is the relied upon position in the Shafi school, my Shafi fiqh teachers would pretty much always tell me that even though that is the position, there are two sunnahs that you should never miss.
The
And that's
Fajr, Maghrib.
the two sunnahs before Fajr and the witr.
Oh, okay. And so, and not the Maghrib, does it, Maghrib sunnahs don't come in there?
So in the Shafi school, no. In the Shafi school, technically speaking, you wouldn't pray any sunnahs. Like you wouldn't pray the two sunnahs before Fajr, you wouldn't pray witr, nothing. You would just do all your qada. However, more contemporary Shafi scholars have said that because of the emphasis in terms of the practice of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu in terms of the two sunnahs before Fajr and the witr prayer, like I said, even in the Hanafi school, they consider witr not even to be a sunnah, it's considered to be a wajib. Like basically, they consider it to be almost an obligation. There's only a slight difference between fard and wajib in the Hanafi school. But in any case, they say that because of the emphasis in terms of those two prayers, that even if you're doing qada prayers, that you should still do those two sunnahs at least.
Yes.
So that would be
yes, I'm sorry to cut you off. And so if you have prayers to make up, can you make them up at any other time? Like, can I make them up at a time other than the time that the prayer was supposed to be made? Like, could I make up Fajr after the sun has risen, in that portion of the morning? Can I make up Fajr prayers there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The short answer will be yes. That's why I said some of my teachers, they recommend that you use the tahajjud time
Oh,
to
yes.
do qada prayers.
Okay. I have another concern, but I'm going to wait and see if other people can talk, and then I will come back.
Oh, okay. No problem. While learning about the sunnah, I misunderstood the sunnah rak'ahs and would make them before the prayer time. Does that nullify the rak'ahs I offered that were intended as sunnah? I don't want to say that it would nullify it. Basically what the ulama would say is that you did not necessarily fulfill the condition of the sunnah in terms of the the sunnahs that are associated with the prayers themselves, meaning the sunnah muakkadas that we've been referring to. However, there's a difference between validity and acceptance. So even though technically speaking, the scholars may say that from a validity perspective, all of the conditions may not have been fulfilled, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that knows intentions. So even though it may not have kind of like passed the fuqaha test, meaning the scholars would say that you haven't necessarily fulfilled the proper conditions for the sunnahs, it still may be a situation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself will accept it because of the intention that he knows that a person has behind it. Just like one of my teachers, he mentioned that from his personal position, he feels that even people who pray a prayer, who the ulama will say their prayer is invalid, but because of the sincerity that that person may have had in that prayer, that it's very possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will still accept that prayer from that person. So, Allahu alam. So the thing is that, again, there's a difference between validity and acceptance. The scholars, in terms of rulings, they only deal with validity. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what prayer he's going to actually accept or not, because there's plenty of people who may have a prayer that is valid according to the scholars, but it may not be accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that we have directly from the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he mentioned that there's some people they pray and they only have half of their prayer accepted, or a fourth or an eighth, and so on. Assalamu alaikum. I have a music question. Is it okay to practice music at home alone? I used to sing classical music a long time ago and left it due to everyone telling me it's haram. So I want to know if I can practice alone. So music is something that you're never going to, and probably up until the time that Isa alayhi salam comes back, you're never necessarily going to have a situation where it's going to be a answer that is going to have consensus on, because there are different hadith, there are meanings, different statements of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as different positions of notable scholars and so on and so forth when it comes to the aspect of music. And so what I usually tell people is that there are certain things that we can say are absolute. So for example, music that has lyrics that are necessarily haram. So they're talking about haram things, whether it be drugs, money, drugs, sex, um, uh, adultery, so on and so forth. And when you have music whose lyrics are talking about haram things, and you necessarily know that that's going to be impermissible. Also, you have situations where certain aspects of musical instrumentation is going to be more agreed upon in terms of impermissibility because of certain statements of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But again, there are different ulama who've given different positions in regards to music. So usually what I tell people is that when it comes to music, you have to say to yourself, do I feel comfortable standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, listening to this type of music, or engaging and participating in this type of music? So the thing is that, I have different teachers, that I've been able to sit in the company with, and they have various positions in regards to how much they will and will not accept in regards to music. And so that's why I say it's very difficult to give an answer. Like, I have my own personal position that I take with music, but that's my own personal position that I take with music. Is not necessarily going to be something where I can say that this is the scholarly position of all scholars throughout history. Music has always been a very contentious issue, an issue that has been differed upon in relation to what extent a person can engage in it, and so on and so forth. And so, for example, generally speaking, singing in of itself is considered to be something that is permissible if it is done without any type of haram lyrics being sung, as we mentioned before. Now, when you try to accompany musical instrumentation with that, that's when you're going to get into more of a debate. And then even with the aspect of musical instrumentation, it's going to be a debate about, are there some exceptions to the musical instruments that are permissible, and so on and so forth. So the thing is that, again, it's a very long discussion, and it's an issue that's been debated for a long time throughout Islamic history. And so a person ultimately has to, see what they feel comfortable with when they have to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in regards to that. And I'm sorry I can't give you any more exacting answer in regards to that. But again, um, there is no final conclusion. And the thing is that I will put this caveat, is that any position that you may read that kind of makes it seem as if there is a final conclusion on it, that is that particular, if it is a scholar that's saying it, because with the internet, anyone can say anything. But if it is a scholar that's saying that this is the final conclusion in regards to music, that is that scholar's position on the matter. But that does not necessarily mean that there's ijma, because the honest reality is that there is no consensus. There is no consensus amongst the various scholars throughout history. There is no consensus on exactly what is going to be permissible and impermissible in regards to music. Scholars have differed upon this matter for generations. And so, yes, you will find fatwa that will say absolutely music is haram, or absolutely music is permissible, and everything in between. But again, these are personal positions from scholars, if it is coming from a scholar. But there is no ijma on regards to the issue. So I'll add that as well. What about a young boy, age 14, who has a mustache? Should he grow it or shave it? The sunnah for the mustache is that you trim it. And for example, in the Shafi school, what they mean by trimming it is that the hair, if it grows over the lip such that you cannot see the upper pink portion of the lip, that you trim the hair such that you are able to see it. But that you should not necessarily have the mustache growing excessively long. Speaking,
He didn't have it.
hmm?
He didn't have it like 6 months ago. Now I saw him. He has this mustache across his face. I'm like, are you supposed to be growing that?
Yeah. So the mustache is something that can be kept,
Mm-hmm.
but that you trim it such that the hairs above the lips can be seen.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Even in some situations, like there's even difference of opinion in regards to trimming. The position that I mentioned just now was the Shafi school position, but even some will say that you can trim the mustache altogether, or that you just trim it down so that it's just not as thick. So, there's difference of opinion in regards to what truly it means to trim. But the position I just gave in terms of cutting the hairs such that the hairs above the lip can be, the skin above the lip can be seen, that's the Shafi school position.
Okay. Shukriya.
Speaking of prayers, I was doing my salat prayers with the YouTube prayers for beginners. There seems to be different styles of wording in many of the salat prayers, along with the main verses from Al-Fatiha. Is there a book that has the original prayers that would be correct salat prayers? I do have an Arabic teacher that will eventually go over the proper Arabic pronunciation. So, I'm not 100% sure in terms of what it means in regards to differencing in terms of the Fatiha. The Fatiha, any surah, any chapter of the Quran, there is there is only um one version of it, so to speak. There are different ways of recitation. These are called the qira'at. So that's, for example, if you were to have Surah Al-Duha, for example, if you were to recite it based upon the common one that many of us are familiar with in terms of recitation, which is Hafs and Asim, you recite it وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. However, for example, if you were to recite it in Warsh, it would be وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. So there is some possible um, some possible variants in terms of the qira'at, but this is going to be within the realm of Quranic recitation, and there are certain rules and regulations that govern that. But in general, the Fatiha is going to be more or less consistent. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'een, Ihdina as-sirata mustaqim, Sirata alladhina an'amta alayhim, غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Now the thing is that you will have people recite the Fatiha and they may be reciting it incorrectly, or sometimes they may be reciting it correctly, but in one of the different varying qira'ats. So if that's what you're referring to, then that is something that you would go over with a teacher of tajweed, a teacher of Quranic recitation, and they can make sure that you are reciting your Fatiha based upon one of the valid qira'ats, one of the valid ways of recitation. In regards to different other aspects of the prayer and things in terms of things that we say, there are different narrations that mention different ways of doing it. So for example, even in the tashahhud, there are different narrations of the tashahhud. So for example, in the Hanafi school, they prefer the narration that mentions Atayatu lillah wa salawatu wa tayyibatu wa salamu alaykum wa nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to the end. But there's another variation that, for example, mentions Atayatu wa barakatuh wa salawatu wa tayyibatu lillah. Assalamu alaikum wa nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now the thing is that all of these would be considered to be valid ways of reciting the tashahhud, but these are just different narrations that we've collected throughout the corpus of hadith. And so some scholars have made preferences for certain narrations over others. So in general, what I would recommend, similar to one of the questions that we answered a little bit earlier, is that if you're able to go through a book of fiqh, then that can answer many of the questions that may come up. And that will be in a formal way, such that you can get clarity on what is absolutely required versus what is possibly preferred versus what are possibly some of the varying opinions that may exist in regards to the aspects of the prayer and so on and so forth. And Allah knows best.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa barakatuh.
So I wanted to ask a question regarding dawah. So I come from a Christian background. All of the family seems to be Christian, and I don't seem to be able to give dawah to them. Like if they ask me a question, I will definitely answer them to the best of my ability. But I'm not able to start engaging them in a conversation regarding their practice and how I attempt to practice Islam. And it's kind of like concerning me because I feel like I'm not saying anything. Now, I have relatives that have actually stopped speaking to me because one of them said, "Oh, we're all Christians." I said, "I'm not Christian," and then I didn't say anything else, and he stopped speaking to me, a cousin, and a lot of other a number of them do not communicate with me, but some of some of my parents friends of my parents, their children and stuff. Like we kind of like talk periodically, but I do not get into a conversation with them regarding religion, and it kind of concerns me.
Yeah, it definitely is a concerning situation. You know, I've myself have been in more recent times, you know, thinking about this concept because the reality of it is that from the standpoint of Islam, what we believe is that if a person is on a path other than Islam, that is a path that can ultimately lead to a great a great difficulty and hardship, once they leave this abode. And who would want that for any of their loved ones? And so, but one of the things that one of my teachers he recommends is that first and foremost, that one of the strongest forms of dawah out before we get to the strongest form of dawah, but one of the strongest forms of dawah is not necessarily in what you say, but more in what you do. That's, many of my teachers have mentioned this, is that one of the best ways of trying to call people to Islam is to take the prophetic advice, خَلَقَ النَّاسِ بِخُلُقٍ حَسَنٍ, that treat people with excellent or beautiful characteristics. That if you actually ask many people who become Muslim, is that oftentimes, and of course it's not going to be always, but many times when people become Muslim, is not necessarily based upon rational argumentation, or because they read the Quran, or because someone had proved to them that Islam is true necessarily, but oftentimes even the initial spark for them to be interested in Islam had to do with their interactions with other Muslims. That they interacted with Muslims and they had a good experience interacting with Muslims, so it made them interested in Islam. And so that's why I mentioned is that one of the strongest forms of dawah is, very much so how we treat the people around us. Is that if we treat the people around us with good character, then that can be the door that eventually will open their openness to Islam, possibly. The strongest form of dawah is the making of dua. Is that if we were to be quite honest with ourselves, at least for the fakir, we have to ask ourselves, how often, or if ever, have I made a sincere dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, whoever it is that may be in my life. That, if I have a family member, if I have friends, or whoever it may be, have I sincerely asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them? Because at the end of the day, none of us can make anyone a Muslim. Muslims are only chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that guides people. We are not the ones that guide. And this is why, even if we look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that he had people in his own family that would not accept Islam. So for example, his uncle Abu Lahab, who the Prophet ﷺ had a strong relationship with, two of his daughters were married to two of the sons of Abu Lahab at one point in time, that he could not convince his uncle to become Muslim. And the Prophet ﷺ, he's the one that has the greatest of character. He is the one that has the unadulterated message of Islam. He is the one that absolutely we are to follow without question. And he was not able to guide his relatives, at least not all of them. And this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned in the Quran that it's not us, or it's not the Prophet ﷺ who guides people, but rather it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guides. And so making sincere dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides people. And then, if you're able to, and it's going to vary based upon the relationships that you have with people, if you're able to bring up the matter of religion based upon your personal knowledge of that person and their tolerance or possible intolerance towards religion, that that would be a situation to look at in terms of what would be the best approach in regards to approaching the topic of religion with this person. Because there's some people, they're just, religion is not their thing. Like, you start talking about religion, like, they're going to completely ignore you, and so on and so forth. And so the thing is that, however, if you do have a person who is willing to talk about religion, and then just trying to present the religion in a good light, but again, that is going to be even more indicative in terms of what they see from you in terms of your interactions with them. So it's not necessarily like a one size fits all type of thing. So I can't necessarily, so I'm not necessarily saying like you have to necessarily put, Islam pamphlets in their, on their dresser and these type of things. But oftentimes the two biggest factors in terms of dawah are going to be us making dua for these individuals, because again, at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that can change hearts. And two, having good interactions with people, fulfilling their needs. you know, why is it that some people enter into Christianity? One of it is that, if you go to certain churches, for example, they fulfill the needs for people. People are hungry, they go to a church, they're giving them food. You know, if people are in a state of poverty, they go to a church, they're giving them money and clothing and so on. So, for example, like, if you're helping to fulfill the needs for someone, that also causes their hearts incline towards you. And essentially it would be something that it would possibly incline their hearts towards whatever it is that you're upon, so to speak. And so, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us wisdom, to give us hikmah in terms of what is the best approach to be an example for people in regards to Islam, and to be a good source of dawah and not be the opposite, meaning that we become a source of people turning away from Islam. Wa na'udhu billah. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us better in regards to our interactions with people. How to understand Islam and learn and grow as a new Muslim. One primary way, and this is the way of the Sahaba, is to have good suhbah, to have good companionship. So what I would say for a person that's asking this question is that if you have a person that you trust and is qualified and can teach you the basics of the religion, that would be one of the best ways of going about it. If you can be with this person in person, even better. But even if you're not able to, if they're in a situation where you can benefit from them online, whatever the case may be, then do so. Having good friends in terms of those who you interact with on a regular basis. This is another means. But having a teacher that you trust, that you feel confident in, that you feel comfortable with, and that in general is qualified, then that is going to be your primary basis, because oftentimes, trying to navigate the realm of Islam on one's own, especially in our times today with Google and YouTube and so on and so forth, you can be all over the place. So the traditional method is that a person will sit with a teacher, or as the example that one of my teachers would give is that you would dig your spot in the sand, and you would dig in the same spot and continue to dig until eventually you hit water. And so the basis of that is that, you would sit with a teacher and you continue to sit and continue to learn and continue to grow until eventually, inshallah ta'ala, you have that moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, enlivens your heart such that everything that you've been learning becomes a living embodiment within you. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us to tread the path of learning and growing in Islam. A question on work for women. Can a woman directly with man even if she wears a hijab? Can a woman work directly with a man even if she wears hijab? I have a job in question where I may have to work alone with a man. I'm not sure of that. So the general rule is that the relationship between men and women is that it would be impermissible unless there is a reason for there to be a relationship there. So in regards to work, there are situations in which men and women can interact, even if it's when it's for a work purpose. So the thing is that I don't know specifically what the nature of the job is, but it's very possible that there would not be a Sharia problem as long as certain etiquettes are taken into consideration, meaning that the interaction between a person in the opposite and another person of the opposite gender is only in those things that are actually necessary. So the example that's usually given is like a person who is a medical practitioner. So whether it be a doctor or a nurse or something like that, is that in certain situations within those fields, you may have to actually come into physical contact with a person of the opposite sex. And so in those situations that you would only come into physical contact with that individual to the extent necessary, and in all feasible situations that you would make it a situation that you were never alone with that individual. So for example, even if it's just to the extent of keeping the door open in the exam room, such that you're not alone and secluded with a person of the opposite sex. So the thing is that uh, without having details of the situation, is that I can only give like a general answer to the question in regards that yes, there are situations where it could be permissible, but it's going to be a situation where we will look at the specifics to kind of try to determine if there's any caveats, so to speak, that would need to be looked at to possibly change or modify the job or the situation. So I don't know if that helps. Alhamdulillah. Should you marry a man because he has the knowledge to teach you and he says that he can assist you on this path better if you marry him? He already has a wife. Is it better to marry for piety? Uh, the thing is that it's very difficult for me to answer this question because this is a very specific question. And I don't know who this individual is. I don't know what his reality is. Um, I don't know if he is just looking to get a second wife. I don't know what his current relationship with his wife is. So my advice would be to make sure that you have a wakil, make sure that you have a wali, someone who's looking out for your best interest, and for your wali or your wakil to look into this individual. Because I'm not going to necessarily say that you should or should not marry this individual. I don't know the the details surrounding any of your circumstances, meaning yourself or this man who was proposing marriage this way. But I would say have a wakil, have a guardian um, speak on your behalf, have your wali speak on your behalf, speak to him to try to ascertain that, is this a marriage that you should truly consider going into or not?
Let me clarify it. When you spoke earlier and you were talking about the Prophet alayhi wasalam, marrying someone for a particular reason, that's it's along that line. Let's just put it aside that because I do know about this person and my nephew knows they studied together in Saudi, so that's not the issue. My question basically is that a reason? Is that like the main reason? Does it mean that it's the will of Allah just because a person is knowledgeable and is a pious person? Does that mean that you should marry a person? I mean, it's a good thing to marry a person that's pious, but I mean, I still always search for the will of Allah if it's Allah's will. So that's my question. Is that like primarily in Islam that's the reason? Because I think it said that in the Quran that if you marry for a pious person.
So the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that a woman is married for four things: her wealth, her lineage, her beauty, and her deen. Marry the woman for her deen, or may your hands be rubbed in the dust. Um, and so, for the sake of time, just as like a summation, is that the Prophet ﷺ, his overarching recommendation is that you marry someone because you see them as being a person of taqwa, a person of God consciousness, a person that has a strong relationship and a strong regard in relation to their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the thing is that not everyone who has studied or not everyone that teaches is necessarily a person that necessarily has taqwa. We do have what the Prophet warned us about as well is the ulama su, the evil scholars. And I'm not saying this about this individual. Again, I don't know who this individual is whatsoever. However, the thing is that, one of the things that one of the things that kind of like I would be precautious about is the aspect of this particular individual already having a wife and trying to take on a second wife. Is that, yes, in Islam, it is permissible for a man to take on more than one wife. However, um, from a cultural perspective in America in particular, is that this is not necessarily the easiest type of marriage to try to uphold, in particular when it comes to making sure that all of the wives, all of the family members are receiving their haq, are receiving their due rights. Again, I don't know if this individual will be able to do that or not. So Allahu Alam. Now, in regards to the aspect of if something is Allah's will, we as a matter of aqidah, we believe is ulama as-su. So su is an Arabic term that essentially can mean evil. So there are evil scholars, essentially that. But again, I'm not saying this about anyone specifically. But going back to the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will is that everything that happens in this world, we say is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, and that you will not will anything except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed it. So the thing is that anything that happens is going to be the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, however, not everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows to happen is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is necessarily pleased with. And so again, I can't specifically tell you that this is something that you necessarily should do or not. And the reason why that is because I don't know, the particulars and so on and so forth. A situation, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions in the Quran, it may be that you love a thing, but it could be actually bad for you. And it can be a situation that you hate a thing, but it could actually be good for you. So the thing is that again, I can't, say, from a personal perspective, what the situation is. This is part of the reason why the Prophet ﷺ, he established the aspect of a wali and the aspect of looking at a person for their righteousness and the aspect of, asking others about the characteristics of this individual. I would tell any sister that if you're thinking about getting into a relationship with a man who's already married, then you should ask that man to let you speak to his current wife, and see how she feels about the situation and so on and so forth, because that is also going to be a major factor in your marriage to this individual. Is the co-wife that you're going to have, is it going to be a good relationship that you're going to be able to have with her, or is she in complete opposition to that, such that it's going to be a bad relationship? And are you willing to deal with the different situations that come about with it and so on and so forth? So there's many different factors to take in consideration. And
Thank you.
So again,
You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
when you say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh,
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
um, when you say ulama is what is the criteria for someone to be considered as, I mean, how exactly would you define that term other than, I mean, to say a scholar is correct, just or
That's an interesting question because
because the reason I'm asking is because I suppose just to give you some context is because um I've had the experience before where I've met someone that's either learning Islam or born into Islam. Um, and you kind of converse with them and about various things. And then I've had the experience before where I'll be conversing with someone and then I'm like realizing through conversing with them that there's certain aspects of their belief system that are just diametrically opposed to just certain core practices. So I mean, technically speaking, anybody can teach. I mean, anybody can put together a group and present not like, I mean, like, so for example, um, what, I mean, let's say, just to use an example, let's say fiqh. I mean, technically speaking, anybody that has more knowledge than the average person walking down the street could put together a group and present information about fiqh. However, at what point at what point, how, I mean, what is the means for discerning whether someone is actually a scholar or someone who could be considered as part of the ulama? Because I mean, so for example, um, I've just had that experience before. Like I'll conversing with someone and then come to realize through conversing with them that there are just certain aspects of their belief or certain aspects of the way they treat other people that are just completely outside of Islam. They're completely outside of any concept that I've ever studied through my own efforts to study Islam. Like, I mean, I've had people, like, I know for myself, like, so for example, I was the one who asked the question about the sunnah, about
Mhm.
completing the sunnah and doing so erroneously without realizing it. So I used to make the sunnah thinking I have to hurry up and make the sunnah before the prayer time. That's how completely, that's how much of a misunderstanding I had about the sunnah. I thought you had to make the sunnah before the prayer time came in. So I used to hurry and, go through at least what I understood at the time as the sunnah before the prayer time comes in. So now, understanding what I know now, I look back at the sister who, I first spoke with in regards to just kind of studying Islam and so on and so forth, whose name I won't say because you probably know her, so I just won't say her name. And I look back on it now and I'm just thinking, like, what kind of like the value of the sunnah is that it functions as a means of support for your obligatory acts. Like, you do the sunnah because it's helpful to you in your life as far as, how you govern your life, and it's helpful as far as how you live your faith. It's, helpful in many different ways. So I understand that now. However, when I look back on, I mean, at one point, I mean, this person looked me in the face. I mean, this person looked me dead in the face, knowing that I didn't know what I was, like, I didn't even know enough to know what I didn't know, if that makes sense. I'll, okay, so I didn't even know enough to know to ask her. Like, I could not have gone in and said, I need for someone here to teach me the sunnah. There's no way I could have ever expressed that to her because I didn't even know that the sunnah even existed. And like this person, like literally, like I kid you not, I mean, looked me in the face, knowing that I was, without any real concept of understanding, or that I was still developing a concept of understanding. And when I look back on it now, my learning and my own efforts to learn have taught me that you have to, one of the core requirements, I suppose, or one of the core aspects, perhaps that's a better way of saying it. One of the core aspects of being a Muslim is that you have to want, like, I have to want the same thing for you as my brother and or sister in Islam that I want for myself. So when I think back on it now, I'm like, how can you look me dead in the face without making any effort to, go through certain basic concepts? Like my understanding of the Sunnah was so incomplete that I was literally like rushing to make the Sunnah before the prayer time came in. Like that's how completely in the just out of any like guidance that I was. And I just have had that experience more than once. Like I'll be conversing with someone and I'll just come to realize, like, just see certain things that they do and just the way they treat other people. Um, that's just like I'm just interested to hear your reflections on these kinds of things.
Alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us and forgive uh, forgive us for the shortcomings and the errors that we've made, and guide us to that which is pleasing to Him, uh, and allow us to strive to the utmost to have husnul dhan, to have a good opinion of each other, even when we make mistakes, so we may even harm one another. Yeah, it's kind of like a misnomer in terms of, what does it mean for someone to be an alim, or a scholar, or whatever the case may be. Um, and so the honest answer is that I can't give you one definition, because, for example, if you were to go to some of our um, predecessors, um, there will probably not be a person on the face of the earth that will be labeled as being a scholar in regards to their criterion. You know, I remember one time being in a gathering with Sheikh Sadiq bin Sanina, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the Maliki, what I would consider Maliki ulama, one of the Maliki scholars. And he was giving a talk and giving general nasiha, and he had mentioned that he once had a brother say to him that he went to a particular conference, and he said that he had saw over like 60 ulama, he had saw over 60 scholars attending this particular conference, some number like that, 60 or whatever the case may be. That basically that this was a scholars conference. And Sheikh Sadiq has said that he responded to this individual by saying, "MashaAllah, it's like you went to one conference and you saw over 60 ulama." He said, "I've never met 60 ulama in my entire life." Meaning to say that the criterion that Sheikh Sadiq would place for a person to be given the title or given the status as being an alim, that there haven't been anywhere near 60 individuals that he would say would fulfill that criterion. So the thing is that that's why I say it's kind of like a misnomer. Like, what does it mean to say a person is an alim? I've even heard some of my teachers who are considered to be ulama, and they'll say, things like, well, the ulama, they say, or the ulama have said this, the ulama have said this, meaning that they're not, putting themselves in the title as being an alim, even though in general around the world they're recognized as an alim. So the thing is that there are certain criterion that people will place out there. So basically, like, in certain situations, it's like if you've ever completed an Allen program, so you have a program that says that, we're producing ulama, and a person goes through and they complete that program, whether it's a 6-year program or something like that, or if they get a bachelor's degree. So for example, if they go to Al Azhar or they go to Medina University, or the case may be, and then they receive their bachelor's degree or their master's degree, or in Arabic terms, you receive your shahada, or whatever the case may be, then in that regard, a person could be considered to be an alim. However, if you want to go from a technical perspective, what was the Quranic definition of an alim? Essentially, an alim, from a more Quranic aspect is a person who, whatever it is that they learned in terms of the religion, they implement. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions in the Quran that the only people who truly fear Allah are the ulama. And so what some of our teachers have mentioned about this is that it's not to say the person that gathers up a lot of information, because the gathering of information is not a gauge to say that a person is an alim. Because if that was the case, then the greatest ulama would be our laptops, Google, and whatever the case may be, because they can hold much more information than, generally speaking, the average person can. But the aspect of being an alim is that a person has the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that is more or less the criterion in regards to if a person is truly an alim in the haqiqah sense, in the terms of the true reality. Is this a person who actually fears his Lord or actually has a reverence for his Lord? I can give an example. In the time of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, he used to praise an individual by the name of Bishr Hafi. Bishr Hafi, he's referred to as Bishr Hafi, Bishr the barefoot. He was an individual who was not known to be an alim in a formal sense. But Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, he used to praise Bishr. And so it's mentioned that one time some of Imam Ahmed's students had asked him about this, that, Imam Ahmed being this great scholar, and even Imam Ahmed himself, he was a very humble individual. Like he was very hesitant if he ever at any point in time necessarily identified himself personally as a scholar, so to speak. But in any case, his students had asked him, like, why do you praise Bishr the way that you do when he's not considered to be of the ulama? Like he doesn't come and sit in our circles. He doesn't, he's not a scholar of hadith or fiqh or, any of the Islamic sciences. And so they're asking him, like, why do you praise him the way that you do? And Imam Ahmed had said in response by saying that he has the fruits of knowledge. Meaning what? Meaning that essentially, if you wanted to put it in one aspect, is that Imam Ahmed was like giving his students a lesson in this situation, where it's like everything that we're trying to do by the studies that we do. So us sitting here studying hadith and going over mas'alas, different aspects of questions and things like that related to fiqh and so on and so forth. Everything that we're doing in this circle, we're trying to gain what he already has. That basically our studies, our ilm that we're gaining is supposed to be a means for us to gain nearness and closeness and a greater relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Bishr already has that. So even though he didn't formally go through the studies of ilm the way that we are, he has the fruits, he has the benefits that we're actually still searching for. And so he's recognizing the aspect that this is an individual who didn't necessarily go through the formal studies of the deen, but he's an individual who has taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the whole point of the deen. And it's the whole point of study. So that's like, it goes back to the aspect of, like, mentioned what the Prophet ﷺ had warned us about, the ulama su, the evil scholar, meaning the person, he has all this knowledge, but he is not, or she is not acting upon that knowledge. So even a person who the only thing that they know is wudu and salat, but they act upon that to the highest level of perfection that they are able to. And they do it with complete sincerity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That person is an alim in terms of their wudu and salat, and that person may be greater in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the alim who's memorized all the Quran and all the books of hadith and so on and so forth, but they're hiding nifaq, they're hiding hypocrisy in their heart. Not necessarily major hypocrisy, but it could be a situation where, as it's been warned against by many of our scholars, and then Prophet Muhammad sallallahu as well, is that they're only doing it so that people will call them a scholar, or that people will call them an alim, so that their intentions are not sincere. And so that's why, again, it becomes like a misnomer. Like, I don't like it, for example, when people ask me, I'm just giving a person example, like, ask me like what my title is, or, or they give me a title, or like, this title, that title, because I don't feel like for one, I don't feel like I personally embody what I need to embody. Secondly, I don't feel like I've, given the aspects of ilm, the aspect of knowledge is proper due, and so on and so forth. And so generally speaking, what I found is that a true scholar is not ever going to tell you that he's a scholar or that she's a scholar. A true scholar at best is always going to consider themselves to be a student. Someone that is just truly trying to learn how to gain nearness and how to best to worship their Lord, and recognizing that they're going to have a lot of faults along the way. And that, asking, and that, seeking that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive them for the shortcomings that they have, and also for the shortcomings that they have in implementing the things that they know. But never necessarily be in a situation where they're going to necessarily like try to put themselves up as like, I am this great, scholar, whatever the case may be. However, if you want to go into the aspect of like formal, like, how do we know that someone has certain qualifications, or the like, then like we said before, we have the basis of, the aspect of isnad, in terms of chain of transmission, such that a person receives permission from a person who is generally speaking considered to be a scholar, who gives them permission to teach and to cover certain either text or certain topics, and so on and so forth. And this is going to vary in terms of to what extent a person is going to be able to do that. And so in that regard, it's kind of similar to any other, science, even outside of religion, is that, how do you know that a doctor is a qualified doctor? Well, you know, you're not necessarily going to, do a private investigation on this individual, but if you see that he has been board certified, or that he has a degree from this particular university and this particular medical school, and he did his internship here, and so on and so forth, you're going to have overall confidence that, okay, he knows what he's talking about in terms of medicine. So similarly, that you can have confidence that a person, they know more or less what they're talking about from a general perspective in terms of Islam, because they have these particular qualifications that they receive from this madrasa, this school, or the case may be. But again, from the standpoint of an alim, in terms of haqiqah, like a true alim, that is something where, again, like I said, many of the teachers that I've been around, they'll always say things like, the ulama say this or the ulama say that. They never necessarily identify themselves personally as an alim. And Allah knows best. I know that was kind of like a long-winded response, but inshallah, hopefully that
That's so you're essentially saying that the best response that you can give is just to kind of share that what your experience has been. So I understand that.
yeah.
Or I don't know. I think I understood. What you're saying is that the best response that you can give is to share what some of the interactions that you've had as you've made your own efforts to learn. So, or at least that's what I understood from what you were sharing.
Well, I mean, I would say that the aspect of, an alim is that I would differentiate it in between two categories. You have the haqiqah, the ultimate reality of what an alim is truly supposed to represent from an Islamic perspective or Quranic perspective. And then you have alim in terms of like a formal technical aspect. So the formal technical aspect is a little bit easier. Anyone who's graduated or who has received permission to teach, or the like, from someone who's deemed to be qualified to give permission, or from an institution that is recognized as being able to certify someone as being a particular a scholar in a particular area, then from a technical perspective, that person is an alim from the standpoint of the zahir, from the outward perspective, meaning that they have studied this particular science and they have been given permission to transmit the knowledge that they've acquired. However, from an alim, from a standpoint of ultimate reality, meaning haqiqah, meaning that the criterion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is going to be based upon a person's actual implementation of what it is that they've learned and their actual heart connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that are they a person who truly fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do they truly have taqwa in their heart? And that is not something that a piece of paper or an ijaza or shahada or degree is going to necessarily be able to uh, to uh, to give you the criterion for. I mean, if you want to kind of go more deeper into this a little bit, Imam Ghazali, his books in particular, if you want to look at the Bidayah to Hidayah, the beginning of the guidance, even if you just look at the introduction, Imam Ghazali, he really kind of goes hard at the ulama and basically saying that many ulama, they are not sincere in terms of their knowledge, that they only do it from the standpoint of a reputation or different worldly benefits. And it's not something where they're truly doing it for the purpose of what an alim is supposed to be seeking knowledge for, which is ultimately to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to learn so that you can implement, so that you can become more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and gain a greater connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakallah khairan. I just wanted to offer to the sister that was mentioning being a second wife. There's a resource because I'm also interested in entering into a Tadud al-Zawjat, and there's a resource for marriage and family that's specific to the Muslim community. So I'm gonna see if I can find it and post it in the chat. So I just wanted to offer something because can we define resources for women who are interested in in the chat.
Inshallah. Jazakallahu khairan.
Waiki.
So we may have time for one last comment or possibly question, or before we close out for today. We've covered everyone's questions, or are there topics that they were wanting to discuss?
Ustaz,
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Just a quick question about Udu between a husband and a wife. Is it is the Udu valid? I don't know how to put this together. I mean, usually when you have an Udu, a woman cannot touch a man, only like amongst family. But between a husband and a wife, is the Udu valid? I mean, it is not broken when you are praying and you happen to touch their husband, or
Okay. So it's the aspect, does the wudu break between a husband and a wife if they touch?
Yeah.
So I know just as a default that I know that you're coming from the Shafi school perspective. So I'm primarily going to answer from the Shafi school perspective. So in the Shafi school, the touching of the man and woman who have reached puberty and are technically able to get married, meaning that they're not mahrams for one another, then if there's skin to skin contact, then the mu'tamid position, the most relied upon position in the Shafi school, is that it would break the wudu. That the
So
wudu
is what?
that it would break the wudu, that the wudu would be
Oh,
broken, and that they would need to make wudu again before they did anything that would require them to have wudu. However, having said that, as one of my teachers would put it, Sheikh Hamza Karamati, as he would put it, is that one of the reasons for two people to be married is to be able to touch, meaning that it would be permissible for them to touch one another. And so try your best not to make wudu a factor where it causes kind of like divisions between the husband and wife. You know, the husband or the wife are just trying to avoid touching one another so that they can keep their wudu. But rather, it's part of the sunnah is that, you know, it's considered to be a good thing, even if a person were to make wudu before every prayer, even if they don't necessarily need to make wudu. And so that is the mu'tamid position. There is a position that's usually reserved for Hajj, but it's similar to the Maliki position, in which it says that if you have two people who are not mahrams for each other and they have skin-to-skin contact, that as long as there was no lust between them, there was no desire between them, like it was just a simple touch, there was not a touch that was lustful, then the wudu would not be broken. However, that is not the mu'tamid position in the Shafi school. That is a position that, if I'm not mistaken, was held by one of the scholars within the Shafi school. So it's considered to be a qil. It's considered to be a minor opinion of a scholar within the Shafi school. However, in certain situations, it can be something that is utilized in order to avoid hardships. Like I said, usually it's reserved for Hajj, just due to the difficulty of sometimes maintaining your wudu. For example, when you're doing tawaf and, you know, people, a person of the opposite sex may easily rub up against you skin to skin, and the difficulty of trying to go and make wudu again so that you can, you know, complete your Hajj, complete your tawaf. But again, the mu'tamid position is that if there is a skin-to-skin contact between a man and a wife in the Shafi school, that it would break the wudu and that the person would just make wudu before engaging in any act of worship that requires wudu. And there's only four things that require wudu in terms of act of worship. And that is either going to be the formal prayer itself, meaning that which starts with Allahu Akbar and ends with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Meaning it starts with the takbir and it ends with the tahreem. It ends with the tasneem, or the touching or the carrying of the Quran. And we're talking about in the Shafi school anyway, we're talking about the actual mushaf. So this was not actually even can be considered to be something, for example, if it's a translation of the Quran, technically speaking, in the Shafi school, you don't necessarily have to have wudu for translation. So we're talking about the actual mushaf, which is the full Arabic Quran. So touching or carrying the Quran. And then the other last one that you need to have wudu for is only going to be if you're in Mecca, and that's going to be to make tawaf. So these are the only four reasons why a person would need to necessarily have wudu. So the main thing for most of us is going to be the first three, which is either going to be the prayer, and but we, as we mentioned before, it's considered to be, according to some, a recommendation to make wudu before every prayer anyway. Or if you're going to be touching or carrying an Arabic Quran. And so again, you can uh, you know, you don't necessarily have to worry too much about touching, particularly your spouse, it would just be mindful. It's like, okay, before I pray, I just have to make sure I make wudu before I go to pray. Does that help?
I think so. I'm still confused, but I know, but it means that it's okay between your udu is valid between a husband and wife if you unintentionally like touch each other, or if you're going to do prayer and you have already taken your udu, but then you touch your husband or
Yes. So basically, if you make wudu, you've made a complete wudu, and then there's skin-to-skin contact that happens between a husband and wife, then yes, technically speaking, that would, according to the relied upon position in the Shafi school, that would break the wudu, such that you would need to go make wudu again.
okay, that's what I want to know. Okay.
That's the ultimate position in the Shafi school. But like I said, there is a minor position, appeal, that says that if it's done without lust, meaning that there's a touch that happens, that's skin to skin, but it was done without lust, there's a minor position that will say that it actually would not break the wudu. But that's a minor position. That's not the relied upon position in the Shafi school. The relied upon position is that skin to skin contact between a husband and wife, the wudu would break. And this is also the position in the Hanbali school as well. That skin to skin contact would break. If I'm not mistaken, it's the position in the Hanbali school. If I'm not mistaken. But in any case, in the Shafi school, definitely skin to skin contact would break the wudu. And it would just be a situation that you would just renew your wudu and then go and pray, for example, if you needed to
Right.
pray.
Okay, but if let's say if you're doing your Hajj,
Mhm.
that's going to be difficult, right?
Yeah, so that's all we said. In Hajj, usually the minor position that I mentioned, the scholars say that you can act upon that in that situation just because of the difficulty of it. The difficulty of having to try to maintain the wudu when you have that many people and the likelihood of you brushing up against someone of the opposite sex. And so that's why we say that usually that minor position of the wudu not breaking in terms of when there's no lust in between, they usually will reserve that primarily for when a person goes on Hajj because of the difficulty
So
of how it would be. But
that's what I want to know, because when you're in Hajj, it's not very easy. I mean, intentionally, you have to depend on your husband to to take you wherever you go, and it's not necessarily that you're able to keep on taking your wudu.
So that's why on Hajj is usually when the scholars say to, more or less act upon that position, the position of it not breaking when there's no lust in between. But under other circumstances where it's not as much of a difficulty, then they recommend acting upon the mu'tamid position, which is that it would break the wudu.
All
So
right, thank you.
they give the exception.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
No problem. Right.
Jazakallah.
Wa Right. So, inshallah ta'ala, jazakallahu khairan for everyone for joining us. Inshallah ta'ala, we will, inshallah ta'ala, have our next session next month, bi'idhnillah. And so, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep you all in His care. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala anam wa huwa asbana wa ni'ma wakil. Assalamu alaikum.